Everyone believed she was just a maid. But to one lonely little boy, she had become his entire world. The day she was fired, no one imagined that one decision would change every life inside that mansion forever. The Wilson mansion stood on the highest hill in the city. From the outside, it looked perfect. Luxury cars filled the driveway. Beautiful gardens surrounded the enormous house. Crystal chandeliers sparkled through every window. People often stopped outside just to admire its beauty. Everyone dreamed of living there. But no one knew, behind those expensive walls, lived a little boy who smiled less with each passing day. 8-year-old Ethan Wilson had everything money could buy. The newest toys, the most expensive clothes, the best doctors, the best therapists. Yet, he had something many poor children never experienced: loneliness. 2 years earlier, his mother had passed away after a long illness. Since that day, the cheerful little boy disappeared. A rare illness had also left Ethan unable to walk without a wheelchair. His father, Richard Wilson, one of the richest businessmen in America, loved his son deeply, but love was the one thing he didn't know how to express. He believed expensive hospitals, private doctors, and unlimited money could fix everything, so he buried himself in work. Every morning before Ethan woke up, Richard had already left for meetings. Every night, he returned long after Ethan had fallen asleep. He often stood quietly at his son's bedroom door, looking at him from a distance, whispering, "I'm doing all this for you." But Ethan never heard those words. He only saw an empty chair at breakfast, an empty seat at dinner, and another lonely day. Because of Ethan's condition, many caregivers had been hired over the years. Some stayed a week, others stayed a month, none stayed long. Some lost patience, some cared only about their salary. Some treated Ethan like another responsibility, instead of a child. One rainy afternoon, a new maid arrived at the mansion. Her name was Mary. She was around 30 years old. She wore simple clothes. Her shoes were old. Her hands showed years of hard work. But her eyes were filled with kindness. The house manager looked at her paperwork. "Have you ever worked for a billionaire before?" Mary smiled softly. "No, sir. I've only cared for people who needed love." The manager looked confused. "Love," he shrugged. "Just do your job." When Mary entered Ethan's room, the little boy was staring silently through the window, watching children play outside. Without looking back, he quietly said, "You'll leave too?" Mary didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slowly walked beside him, knelt down, and smiled. "I'm Mary." Still, no answer. She noticed dozens of unopened toys covering the room. She picked up a small teddy bear from the shelf. "What should we call him?" Ethan sighed. "I don't care." Mary pretended to whisper something into the teddy bear's ear, then suddenly gasped dramatically. "Oh no." Ethan looked at her for the first time. "What?" Mary smiled. "He says he's scared." Ethan frowned. "Why?" "Because," Mary whispered, "he's never had a best friend before." For a second, silence filled the room. Then, something happened that none of the previous caregivers had ever managed to do. A tiny smile appeared on Ethan's face. It lasted only a moment. But Mary saw it, and she smiled too. Outside the bedroom door, Richard had returned home early for an important phone call. As he passed by, he heard something he hadn't heard in almost 2 years. His son's laughter. He stopped walking, closed his eyes, and listened carefully. For the first time since his wife's death, the mansion no longer sounded empty. Richard slowly looked through the half-open door. Inside, Mary and Ethan were sitting on the floor, laughing together over a silly teddy bear. Richard didn't interrupt them. He simply stood there, watching silently. Without realizing it, the first miracle inside that mansion had already begun. Richard remained standing outside Ethan's bedroom. For several seconds, he couldn't move. The sound of his son's laughter echoed through the hallway like something he had almost forgotten existed. His eyes slowly became wet. He whispered to himself, "When was the last time I heard him laugh like this?" He couldn't remember. Maybe 2 years, maybe longer. Inside the room, Mary was pretending the little teddy bear had a funny voice. She made it dance across the bed. Ethan burst into laughter. "No, Mary, Mr. Teddy can't dance." Mary laughed too. "Oh really? Then show him how it's done." Ethan smiled and shook his head. "I can't." The room suddenly became quiet. Mary looked into his eyes. She knew exactly what he meant. She didn't try to change the subject. She gently held the teddy bear in front of Ethan and smiled. "Then we'll teach him together." She placed the teddy bear in Ethan's lap. "It doesn't matter if someone walks fast, slowly, or not at all. What matters is that they never stop smiling." Ethan looked down at the teddy bear. For the first time, someone wasn't looking at his wheelchair. Someone was looking at him. That simple moment planted a small seed of hope inside his heart. Days passed, then weeks. Something inside the Wilson mansion slowly began to change. Every morning, Mary would open Ethan's curtains. The warm sunlight filled the room. "Good morning, my little hero." She always greeted him with the same smile. Ethan began waiting for those words. They ate breakfast together, read adventure books together, painted pictures together. Sometimes they even built castles from toy blocks across the bedroom floor. The servants watched in amazement. One afternoon, the old gardener smiled as he watered the flowers. "I haven't seen Master Ethan this happy since his mother was alive." The cook nodded quietly. "It's like life has returned to this house." Even Ethan's doctors noticed the difference. During a regular checkup, the therapist smiled at Richard. "Mr. Wilson, I don't know what has changed, but Ethan is responding much better than before. His emotional health is improving. And when a child's heart begins to heal, the body often follows." Richard looked surprised. "You mean, there's hope?" The doctor smiled. "There has always been hope. He just needed someone who made him want to keep fighting." Richard immediately thought of Mary. For a moment, he almost walked into the kitchen to thank her. But his phone rang. Another business emergency. Another meeting. Another deal worth millions of dollars. He looked toward Ethan's room. Then sighed. "I'll thank her later." And once again, he drove away. That evening, Mary tucked Ethan into bed. The little boy held the teddy bear close to his chest. "Mary." "Yes, sweetheart. Promise me something." She smiled. "What is it?" "Promise you'll never leave me." Mary's smile slowly faded. She gently brushed his hair away from his forehead. "I'll always care about you." Ethan shook his head. "No, I mean forever." Mary looked away for a second. She knew life made promises difficult. But seeing the fear in Ethan's eyes, she softly kissed his forehead. "As long as God allows, I'll be here." Ethan finally closed his eyes peacefully. Within minutes, he was asleep. Mary quietly turned off the bedroom light. She didn't notice. Richard had been standing outside the door again. This time, he had heard every word. For the first time, he realized something money had never been able to buy. His son didn't need another expensive toy. He didn't need another famous doctor. He simply needed someone who loved him without expecting anything in return. Richard looked at Mary. For a brief moment, he wanted to thank her. But before he could speak, his phone rang once again. His face immediately changed. The smile disappeared. He answered the call. "What?" His voice echoed through the hallway. Mary froze. Richard's expression turned pale. One of his company directors spoke urgently on the phone. "Sir, your flight has been delayed. And Ethan has suddenly developed a high fever." Richard's heart began racing. He turned toward Ethan's bedroom, where Mary was already running inside, completely unaware that the next few hours would change all of their lives forever. Mary rushed to Ethan's bed the moment she heard him coughing. His small body was trembling. His forehead was burning with fever. She gently placed her hand on his head and whispered, "Oh, Ethan. You're burning up." Without wasting a second, she grabbed a thermometer. A few moments later, her heart sank. 104 degrees Fahrenheit. She immediately called the family doctor. "Please come quickly. His fever is very high." The doctor assured her he was on his way. Mary didn't panic. She stayed calm. She placed a cool towel on Ethan's forehead. She held his little hand tightly. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm right here. You don't have to be afraid." Half asleep, Ethan squeezed her hand. "Don't leave." Mary smiled through tears. "I won't." The doctor arrived within 20 minutes. After examining Ethan carefully, he looked at Mary and nodded. "You did the right thing. If you had waited longer, the fever could have become much more dangerous." Mary thanked God quietly. She stayed beside Ethan all night. She didn't eat. She didn't sleep. Every few minutes she checked his temperature. Whenever Ethan opened his eyes, the first face he saw was Mary's. By early morning, the fever finally began to fall. The doctor smiled. "He's stable now. You've taken wonderful care of him." Mary closed her eyes in relief. She whispered, "Thank you, God." Later that afternoon, Richard's private jet finally landed. He had canceled an important international meeting the moment he heard about Ethan's condition. He rushed into the mansion. "Where's Ethan?" The servants looked nervous. "He's upstairs, sir." Richard ran toward the bedroom. When he entered, he saw Ethan sleeping peacefully. Mary sat quietly beside the bed. Her eyes were red from staying awake all night. She hadn't even changed her clothes. Richard looked at his son. Then at Mary. "What happened?" Before Mary could explain, Richard's personal assistant hurried into the room. "Sir, the board members heard Ethan became seriously ill. They're asking what happened." Richard's stress exploded. His business problems, the canceled trip, the sleepless night, everything crashed together. He looked directly at Mary. His voice became cold. "I hired you to protect my son. So how did he become this sick?" Mary stood slowly. "Sir," the doctor said. Richard interrupted her. "I asked a simple question." His loud voice echoed through the room. The servants outside froze. Mary lowered her eyes. I never left his side. The doctor believes it was a sudden viral infection. But he's getting better now. Richard wasn't listening anymore. All he could see was his son lying in bed. His fear turned into anger. You had one responsibility, and you failed. Mary felt her heart break. No, sir, I promise. I did everything I could. Richard pointed toward the door. I don't want excuses. I want results. Silence filled the room. Then, he spoke the words that changed everything. You're fired. The entire mansion became silent. One servant quietly covered her mouth. Another looked down at the floor. Nobody expected this. Mary couldn't believe what she had just heard. She looked toward Ethan. He was still asleep, completely unaware that the person who had become his safe place was being forced to leave forever. Mary slowly removed the small teddy bear from her pocket. She placed it gently beside Ethan's pillow. She leaned down, kissed his forehead one last time, and whispered with tears in her eyes, "My little hero. I'll always pray for you." She quietly picked up her small bag. It contained only a few clothes. Nothing more. As she walked toward the front door, not a single servant could hold back their tears. The old gardener quietly whispered, "This house has just lost its heart." Mary stepped outside. The heavy mansion doors slowly closed behind her. She stopped for one last look. Tears rolled down her face. Then she turned and walked away. At that exact moment, upstairs, Ethan slowly opened his eyes. He looked around the room. His first words were barely above a whisper. "Mary." Ethan slowly opened his eyes. The room was unusually quiet. The morning sunlight still entered through the large window. The birds were still singing outside. Everything looked exactly the same. Yet, something felt terribly wrong. He looked toward the chair beside his bed. It was empty. He smiled weakly and whispered, "Mary." No answer. He looked toward the bathroom. The door was open. No one was there. His little hands tightened around the teddy bear. Again he called, "Mary." His voice was louder this time. Still, only silence. A housekeeper entered with breakfast. She forced a smile. "Good morning, Master Ethan." Ethan immediately looked behind her. "Where's Mary?" The woman froze. She didn't know what to say. She's. Ethan interrupted. "Tell her I'm awake. I want breakfast with her." The housekeeper lowered her head. "I'm sorry. Mary isn't here." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean? When is she coming back?" The woman couldn't answer. Tears slowly filled her eyes. She quietly walked out of the room. A few minutes later, Richard entered carrying a brand new remote control racing car. It was one of the most expensive toys in the world. He smiled. "Look what Daddy brought for you." Normally, any child would have screamed with excitement. But Ethan didn't even look at it. He asked only one question. "Where's Mary?" Richard gently placed the toy on the bed. "Son, we have a new caregiver coming." Ethan stared at him. "I didn't ask for a new caregiver. I asked for Mary." Richard took a deep breath. "She doesn't work here anymore." For a moment, Ethan didn't understand. Then his tiny voice trembled. "You sent her away." Richard remained silent. That silence gave Ethan his answer. The little boy slowly hugged the teddy bear against his chest. Tears began rolling down his cheeks. "You promised. You said nobody would take her away." Richard knelt beside the bed. "I'll buy you anything you want. A bigger room, more toys. We can even go to Disneyland." Ethan finally looked at his father. His eyes were full of pain. "I don't want Disneyland. I just want Mary." Richard's heart tightened, but he still believed time would heal everything. Days passed. The new caregiver tried everything. She brought games, books, chocolate, cartoons. Nothing worked. Ethan barely spoke. The room that had once echoed with laughter became painfully silent. The colorful drawings Mary had helped him make remained on the walls. But now they only reminded him of what he had lost. Every night, he placed the teddy bear beside the empty chair, as if he believed Mary would return and sit there again. Sometimes, he quietly whispered, "Good night, Mary," then closed his eyes while crying himself to sleep. Meanwhile, across the city, Mary had found a tiny room above an old bakery. The room was small. The ceiling leaked whenever it rained. She had very little money left. But none of that hurt as much as one thought. Did Ethan eat today? Is he smiling? Is someone reading him his bedtime story? Every evening after finishing work, Mary quietly walked to the park across from the Wilson mansion. She never went near the gate. She simply sat on a bench, holding Ethan's favorite little drawing in her hands. She looked toward the mansion, closed her eyes, and whispered, "Please, Lord, take care of my little hero. If he ever cries, please comfort him. If he feels alone, please remind him I never stopped loving him." A single tear rolled down her cheek. She wiped it away, smiled through the pain, and walked home. She had no idea that inside the mansion, someone else was crying too. The following Monday, Richard received an urgent call from Ethan's doctor. His voice sounded serious. Mr. Wilson, I need you to come to the hospital. It's about Ethan. Richard's heart skipped a beat. What happened? The doctor paused, then quietly said, your son's condition has become much worse. Richard didn't even hang up the phone properly. He rushed out of his office, grabbed his car keys, and sped toward the children's hospital. For the first time in years, he didn't care about board meetings. He didn't care about stock prices. He didn't care about billion-dollar contracts. All he cared about was his son. When Richard reached the hospital, he found Drive Anderson waiting outside Ethan's room. The doctor's face was unusually serious. Richard walked toward him anxiously. Doctor, what happened? Is Ethan all right? Doctor. Anderson remained silent for a few seconds. Then he slowly handed Richard Ethan's latest medical report. Richard looked at the papers, but the words were meaningless to him. He looked back at the doctor. Please, just tell me. The doctor took a deep breath. Physically, his illness hasn't become much worse. Richard looked confused. Then why did you call me like this? The doctor looked directly into his eyes. Because your son's heart has. Richard frowned. I don't understand. The doctor slowly walked toward the hospital window. Outside, children were laughing in the playground. Then he quietly said, Mr. Wilson, for weeks your son was improving. He smiled. He laughed. He cooperated during therapy. He wanted to fight. Richard nodded. Yes. The doctor turned around. But after Mary left, he stopped eating. He refuses therapy. He barely speaks. He has lost hope. Richard's breathing became heavier. The doctor stepped closer and spoke words Richard would remember for the rest of his life. Sir, medicine kept your son alive. He paused, then quietly finished. But love was the reason he wanted to live. Richard felt as if the ground beneath him had disappeared. His hands began trembling. Every memory rushed back. Mary reading bedtime stories. Mary making Ethan laugh. Mary staying awake all night during his fever. Mary kissing Ethan's forehead before leaving. And his own voice. You're fired. A tear rolled down Richard's face. He whispered, what have I done? Without another word, he ran into Ethan's room. The little boy looked weaker than ever. His favorite teddy bear rested beside him. Richard slowly sat next to the bed. Ethan. The little boy opened his eyes. Daddy. Richard gently held his son's hand. I'm so sorry. I made a terrible mistake. Ethan looked at him with tired eyes. Only one question escaped his lips. Is Mary coming home? Richard couldn't answer. His throat closed. Instead, he nodded. I promise you, I'll bring her back. For the first time in days, a tiny spark of hope appeared in Ethan's eyes. That same afternoon, Richard canceled every meeting on his calendar. He instructed his entire staff, I don't care how long it takes. Find Mary. Security teams searched the city. His assistants visited every address they had. Hours passed. Nothing. Late in the evening, the old gardener quietly approached Richard. I think I know where she goes every evening. Richard followed him. They drove across the city until they reached a small public park. On an old wooden bench sat Mary. She was holding a child's drawing. Ethan's drawing. She was quietly praying with tears in her eyes. Richard slowly walked toward her. She looked up, surprised to see him. Before she could stand, Richard did something no one expected. The billionaire, one of the richest men in America, dropped to his knees in the middle of the park. His voice broke as he said, Mary, please forgive me. I judged you without knowing the truth. I was blinded by fear, and I hurt the one person who loved my son like family. Mary's eyes filled with tears. Richard continued, Ethan doesn't need another employee. He needs you. Please come home. Mary didn't answer immediately. She simply asked one question. How is my little hero? Richard could no longer hold back his tears. He hasn't smiled since you left. Mary covered her mouth as tears streamed down her face. Without thinking another second, she whispered, take me to him. When the hospital room door slowly opened, Ethan looked up. For a moment, he couldn't believe his eyes. Mary, she smiled through tears. I'm home, my little hero. Ethan burst into tears. He reached out with both arms. Mary rushed forward and embraced him tightly. The little boy cried on her shoulder like he had been holding back every tear since she left. Even the nurses outside the room wiped their eyes. Richard stood silently in the doorway, watching the reunion, finally understanding that the greatest gift he could ever give his son was not money, it was love. Money can build a mansion, but only love can make it a home. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe for more emotional stories that remind us what truly matters in life. And comment below, love is the greatest wealth. Share this story with someone you love today, because sometimes one act of kindness can change a life forever.